Have you ever wondered why, despite eating healthy and taking care of yourself, you still feel tired, bloated, or just not quite right? I used to ask myself the same question, quietly, almost hoping the answer would be something simple, like stress or just getting older. But deep down, I knew something was off. For months, I ignored those little signals. Persistent fatigue, uncomfortable fullness after meals, restless nights, and chalked them up to normal aging. I thought, this is just how it goes after 65, and went on with my days, hoping it would pass. If you're feeling that way too, I want you to know you're not alone, and more importantly, there's hope. I'm not here to judge or overwhelm you with complicated treatments. What I discovered was surprisingly simple and natural, something I never expected. A healing leaf that gently helped my body heal from the inside out. It wasn't magic, but it worked wonders for me, giving back the energy and peace I thought I'd lost forever. In this video, I'll share my journey and this little-known natural remedy that changed everything for me. So, before we dive in, tell me, have you ever felt these unexplained aches and tiredness? How have you been managing them? Remember, you deserve to live well and feel vibrant every single day. Let's explore this path together. If you are not subscribed, subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. If you like the topic of this video, please comment 1. Now, let's begin. There is something uniquely humbling about sitting in a doctor's office, feeling the paper gown rustle as you shift in the chair, and waiting for words that might change your life. I never thought I'd be here. Not really. Like most people my age, I'd gotten used to the routine aches and quirks of an aging body. We joke about our senior moments, and swap stories about medication side effects, swollen ankles, and cholesterol numbers like they're weather updates. But nothing quite prepares you for the moment when a doctor looks you in the eyes and tells you something is wrong in a way that feels irreversible. I remember the room that day, the hush of machines, the faded magazines, the sense that time was somehow slowing down. My doctor, Dr. Collins, was a gentle, thoughtful man in his late 50s, with graying hair and the habit of reading lab results twice before saying a word. He had the kind of hands that made you feel safe, steady, deliberate, trustworthy. But that morning, as he looked over my test results, I saw his brow furrow, the corners of his mouth turn down, and my heart began to race. He started carefully, asking about my sleep, my appetite, and my energy. I answered honestly, if a little defensively, yes, I was tired most days, but who isn't? Yes, my digestion had slowed, but show me a 70-year-old with a cast-iron stomach. He nodded, taking notes, and then he said, "Your liver tests are high, Susan. You have what we call advanced fatty liver disease. It's not just mild inflammation, it's significant. And if we don't address it now, it could progress to something much more serious." I remember the word serious echoing in my head, bouncing off every anxious thought I'd been collecting. Fatty liver disease? But I wasn't a heavy drinker. I enjoyed the occasional glass of red wine with dinner, nothing more. How could this happen? I stared at Dr. Collins, searching his face for some clue that maybe this was all a mistake, that he would laugh and say, "Oh, you're fine, don't worry." But he didn't. Instead, he explained that as we get older, our bodies process fat and sugar differently. Years of small choices, skipping walks, eating that extra slice of bread, reaching for sweets in the evening, add up. The liver, he said, is a quiet worker, toiling in silence until it can't anymore. When it speaks up, we'd better listen. As I left the office, test results in hand, I felt a peculiar combination of shame and confusion. I kept thinking, how did I not see this coming? Wasn't I careful enough? Wasn't I doing everything right for someone my age? The truth, as I would learn, is more complicated and, oddly, more comforting than that. But at that moment, the diagnosis felt like a verdict on my whole life, and I couldn't help but replay every little thing I'd ignored. The days that followed were a blur. I'd wake up in the morning, reach for my slippers, and feel the heaviness in my legs, the sluggishness that made even the short walk to the kitchen seem like a chore. I thought back to the past few years, and how I'd brushed off the nagging tiredness that clung to me like a sweater in July. Just getting old, I'd tell myself. Nothing to worry about. But now, with the words fatty liver hanging over me, I began to see all the little warning signs that had been quietly knocking at my door. There were the afternoons when I'd sit in my favorite armchair, sunlight streaming in through the window, and feel a strange swelling in my stomach. Not pain, exactly, just a tightness, a kind of discomfort that made me loosen my belt and shift my weight again and again. I'd often finish lunch and still feel as if the food was sitting right there, heavy, refusing to move. I'd started to avoid going out in the evenings because I felt so drained after dinner, so much so that even the thought of a short walk around the block felt overwhelming. There were other signs, too, subtle but persistent. Trouble sleeping, waking up 2 or 3 times a night, and a pale, tired face in the bathroom mirror every morning. Even my family noticed. My daughter called more often, asking if I was all right, and my neighbor, sweet Mrs. Parker, started bringing over homemade soup and just checking in. I thought it was kindness, but maybe they'd seen what I was trying not to see. I now realize how easy it is, especially as we age, to normalize discomfort, to treat aches and pains as inevitable. We write off fatigue as just part of getting old, and ignore our body's gentle warnings. It's almost a badge of honor to keep going, to tough it out, to not make a fuss. I'd fallen into that trap, as so many of us do. But if I'm honest, I also made some mistakes. Mistakes that I now see with painful clarity. They were small, almost invisible at the time, and yet they stacked up year after year, becoming habits so familiar I barely noticed them. Take breakfast, for example. For decades, I started my day with a cup of strong coffee, 2 slices of white toast, and a smear of butter or jam, sometimes both if I was feeling indulgent. On weekends, maybe a piece of cheese or a sweet roll from the bakery. I convinced myself it was a light meal, nothing harmful. After all, I wasn't eating bacon and eggs every day, right? But that white bread and sugar-laden spread were a daily ritual, a comforting routine that seemed harmless, until it wasn't. Lunch and dinner weren't much better. As the years went by and my husband passed away, I stopped cooking real meals for myself. I'd pick at leftovers, eat microwave dinners, or just make do with sandwiches and soup from a can. I told myself it was easier, that I deserved a break from cooking after all these years. But those easy meals were full of sodium, preservatives, and unhealthy fats, things I never would have fed my family when the kids were little. I also became less active. After retiring, I promised myself I'd keep up my walks, maybe even join a Tai Chi class or try gentle yoga. But life had a way of crowding out those good intentions. First, it was an achy knee, then a winter flu that lingered into spring. Before I knew it, I was spending more time in my recliner than on my feet. My days blurred into each other, punctuated only by meals, TV shows, and the occasional visit from friends or family. And then there were the pills, tiny, innocent-looking, lined up in the kitchen cabinet. I'd take a pain reliever for my back, an antacid after a heavy meal, and a sleep aid on restless nights. Over the counter, easy to buy, easy to pop without much thought. I'd read about supplements online, turmeric, milk thistle, vitamin E, and added them to my routine, thinking they might help my liver or give me more energy. It's funny how we want simple fixes and quick solutions, especially when we're tired or scared. But I never once asked my doctor if any of those supplements were right for me, or even safe given my other medications. I just assumed, like so many, that more was better. Of course, the internet didn't help. With every search, I found a new miracle cure, a secret detox, a 5-day cleanse that promised to reset my liver. I tried them all: lemon water first thing in the morning, green smoothies that tasted like lawn clippings, and teas with mysterious names, and labels covered in gold foil. Some made me feel queasy, others just left me hungrier than before, but none of them brought lasting relief. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. Looking back, I see now that I was desperate for something, anything, that would undo years of habits in just a few days. I wanted to believe that if I just found the right tea, the perfect supplement, I could erase my diagnosis and go back to the way things were before. But that's not how life works, is it? Our bodies remember. Our choices matter. The real work, as I would discover, isn't done in a week. It's a commitment, a willingness to show up for yourself every day, even when it's hard. But at the time, all I saw was failure. Each new fix was another swing and a miss. I grew more frustrated and more ashamed. Why wasn't I getting better? Why did the scale barely budge? Why did I still wake up feeling tired? Still see that puffy, pale face in the mirror? I wondered if maybe this was just my lot in life, that maybe, after a certain age, it was too late to change. My friends tried to help, offering their remedies and stories. "Try apple cider vinegar," said one. "My sister swears by it." Another pressed a jar of home-pickled beets into my hands, convinced it would clean me out. I thanked them and tried a spoonful here, a cup there, but nothing seemed to make a real difference. It's a lonely feeling, that kind of disappointment. It seeps into your bones and makes you doubt not just your body, but your spirit. One night, after a particularly restless sleep, I sat at my kitchen table staring at a cup of herbal tea and the pamphlet from my doctor's office. It listed lifestyle changes: eat more vegetables, walk daily, limit sugar and saturated fats. "If only it were that easy," I muttered. It sounded so simple on paper, but in real life, with habits set deep and energy at an all-time low, it felt insurmountable. I started thinking about my mother, about how she always insisted on listening to your body and eating the colors of the rainbow. As a child, I'd roll my eyes and sneak cookies after dinner, but now, with the benefit of age and hindsight, I realized she'd been right all along. Our bodies do talk to us, quietly at first, then louder if we ignore them. Mine had been whispering for years, and I, distracted, stubborn, and a little bit afraid, hadn't listened. But that night, something shifted. Maybe it was the diagnosis, the memory of my mother's voice, or just the realization that I wanted more. More time with my grandchildren, more walks on sunny mornings, more laughter at family dinners. I decided that I was done with shortcuts and empty promises. If I was going to heal, it would have to be the slow, steady way, one step at a time. So I made a promise to myself. I would start small, with the basics. I would cook real meals, even if it was just for me. I would walk every day, even if it was only around the block. I would talk to my doctor about every supplement and pill before adding them to my routine. I would treat my body with the same care and respect I had once shown my family. And most importantly, I would forgive myself for not knowing better, for not acting sooner, for all the little mistakes that had brought me here. That was the first day of the rest of my life. It wasn't easy. Old habits die hard, and there were plenty of days when I wanted to quit. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and more than a few tears. But little by little, things began to change. My energy improved, my sleep deepened, and my reflection grew a little brighter. I learned that healing isn't a destination, but a journey, a long, winding road full of lessons and surprises. Looking back now, I see those early warning signs not as failures, but as the first gentle nudges on the path to something better. My doctor's diagnosis, painful as it was, became the turning point I so desperately needed. The mistakes and bad habits, the failed quick fixes, they're all part of my story, part of what makes me who I am. As I continue down this road, I hope my story can serve as a light for others. Proof that it's never too late to listen to your body, to ask for help, and to choose a new way forward. If you're reading this and seeing yourself in my words, please know this: You are not alone, and it is never, ever too late. Our bodies are resilient, and our spirits are stronger than we think. With patience, compassion, and a little help from those who care, healing is possible. Even at 65, even at 75, even when hope feels far away. So here's to new beginnings, to small changes that add up, and to the wisdom that comes from living and learning, one day at a time. There comes a moment in life, no matter how many years we've traveled or how many storms we've weathered, when something inside us shifts. For me, that moment arrived quietly, almost unremarkably, but it changed the entire course of my days. I called it my turning point, and in truth, I'd never seen it coming. In the weeks after my doctor's diagnosis, I found myself moving through each day in a strange fog. I went through the motions, brushing my teeth, shuffling to the kitchen, reading the newspaper, making small talk with my neighbor on the porch, but nothing felt quite real. Everything was tinged with a quiet sadness, a kind of slow-motion disbelief. I had always thought of myself as fairly healthy for my age. I had survived heartbreak, raised a family, and land earned to live on my own after my husband passed. I had endured the aches and losses that come with growing older, but I'd done it all with quiet dignity, or so I thought. But now I was facing something I couldn't simply outlast. I kept replaying Dr. Collins' words in my mind. Your liver is struggling. You need to take this seriously. They echoed at odd hours, when I stood at the window at dawn, watching the first blue light creep over the yard. In the evenings when the house felt too quiet, too empty. There was a new heaviness to everything, a weight in my chest, a tiredness I couldn't sleep away. That first week, I wandered from room to room, feeling like a stranger in my own home. I'd catch my reflection in the hallway mirror and hardly recognize the person looking back at me. Where had my energy gone? My confidence? Even my appetite had faded, replaced by a gnawing anxiety that made my stomach twist. I started to avoid phone calls from my children, not wanting to worry them or admit that I was afraid. I told myself it was just a phase, that I'd bounce back, but the truth was I felt lost and, if I'm being honest, a little bit ashamed. The emotional response to a diagnosis like that, especially when you're older, isn't something anyone prepares you for. There's a mix of anger, regret, fear, and a peculiar kind of grief. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one evening, the diagnosis letter open beside my mug of tea, and just letting the tears come. I was angry at myself for not paying attention, for dismissing those small warning signs, for believing I was somehow immune to real trouble because I'd always done things pretty well. I regretted all those days I'd said, "I'll walk tomorrow," all the times I'd reached for bread or cookies instead of something green and fresh. I felt frightened, not of dying exactly, but of losing my independence, of becoming a burden, of having less time to enjoy the simple joys that still made life sweet. Most of all, I felt grief for the person I used to be, for the easy mornings, the pain-free afternoons, for the gentle comfort of believing everything was still okay. I thought of my husband and wished, for the 100th time, that he were still here to hold my hand and tell me I'd get through this. But he wasn't, and I was left to face it alone, save for the gentle support of friends and family, which sometimes made me feel more vulnerable, not less. For a little while, I tried to keep my feelings tucked away. I went through the recommended motions. I made lists of foods to avoid, researched exercise routines for seniors, and printed out articles about liver health. I pretended to be proactive while feeling adrift, as though none of it would matter. And in the background, the temptation to find an easy fix grew stronger. It's funny, when you feel lost, you start reaching for anything that promises hope. I tried everything. At first, I followed Dr. Collins' advice to the letter. More vegetables, less sugar, no processed food. I forced myself to take short walks, even when my knees protested and the world felt gray. But it was hard. Harder than I'd expected. There were days when the weight of fatigue was too much, and I'd let myself sleep late, skipping breakfast, only to eat toast and jam at lunchtime, convincing myself, at least I'm eating something. I signed up for an online support group, thinking it might help to connect with others facing the same diagnosis. But reading other people's stories sometimes left me more discouraged. Some were thriving, others were struggling. I tried not to compare, but it was difficult not to feel jealous of those who seemed to turn their health around in a few short months, while I was still stuck in the mud. Of course, the internet was full of solutions. Too full. There were endless stories of miracle teas, magical pills, and one-week liver cleanses that promised to restore youth and vitality. Desperate for a breakthrough, I tried a few. I bought a box of herbal detox tea from the health store and drank it faithfully every morning and night. The taste was bitter and the results, well, underwhelming. I felt no different, aside from the slight hit to my wallet. Next, I tried a fad diet I found in a magazine at the library. High protein, no carbs, only clean foods. I spent hours planning meals, buying strange ingredients I'd never heard of, and eating foods that tasted like cardboard. After a week, I was hungrier than ever and still just as tired. The scale hardly budged, my energy didn't return, and my mood was lower than ever. I went through phases of motivation and defeat, bursts of hope when I thought I'd found the answer, followed by disappointment when nothing seemed to work. I grew tired of friends asking how I was doing, of family urging me to just keep at it, as if my struggle was simply a matter of willpower. I felt guilty for not being more grateful, for not pushing through the fog with a smile. I worried that I was failing not just myself, but the people who cared about me. There were days, I'll admit, when I gave up entirely. I'd sink into my recliner, remote in hand, and let the television carry me away for hours. Dinner would be whatever was easiest. Maybe a frozen meal, maybe just crackers and cheese. I told myself it was only temporary, that tomorrow would be better. But the truth was, I didn't know if it would be. One particularly rough evening, after a long day of feeling sorry for myself, I let my mind wander back over my life. I remembered the first house my husband and I had bought together, the laughter of my children when they were small, and the taste of freshly picked tomatoes from our garden in August. I thought about the years I'd spent putting others first, about the pride I took in keeping a clean house, in volunteering at the local church, and in sending birthday cards to my grandchildren. I realized I was longing for a sense of purpose, something bigger than my diagnosis, bigger than the cycle of fatigue and frustration. It was then, in the quiet of my living room, that something changed. I stopped thinking of myself as broken, as someone who needed to be fixed or pitted. I started to see myself as someone worth fighting for. My turning point was not dramatic. It didn't happen in a doctor's office, after a particularly good test result, or at the end of a tearful conversation. It happened in the stillness of an ordinary night, as I finally, honestly faced the fear and disappointment that had been dogging me for weeks. I realized that healing, for me, would not be about quick fixes or grand gestures. It would be about small, persistent steps, a willingness to try again, to fail and start over, to forgive myself for the days I fell short. I wanted to be able to look in the mirror and say, "You tried your best today," even if my best was just a gentle walk or a healthier meal. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun was just rising, streaking the sky with gold and pink. I made myself a cup of herbal tea, this time not because it promised miracles, but because the ritual felt soothing. I sat by the window, let the warmth seep into my hands, and made a quiet vow: I would start again. No more punishing myself for the past. No more expecting overnight transformation. Just one good choice, then another, and then another. I began to reach out, not just to my family but to my community. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Parker, and invited her for a walk. We moved slowly, talking about everything and nothing, and when I got home I felt lighter, somehow, than I had in weeks. I called my daughter and confessed how scared I'd been, how lost. She listened, really listened, and told me she was proud of me for sharing. I felt seen, not as a patient, but as a person. I went back to the basics. I dusted off my old recipe cards and cooked a simple meal. Baked chicken, steamed green beans, a baked potato with just a touch of butter. It wasn't fancy, but it was real food. I made a shopping list that included fresh vegetables and fruit. I promised myself to drink more water, to take my medications exactly as prescribed, and to check in with Dr. Collins for guidance before trying any new supplement or miracle cure. There were setbacks, of course. Some days, I would slip into old habits, skipping my walk, and giving in to the temptation of something sweet. But instead of letting guilt spiral me back into defeat, I learned to pause, to breathe, to remind myself that every day is a new chance. I started keeping a little notebook on my nightstand, where I'd jot down one thing I was grateful for and one thing I did well each day, no matter how small. Sometimes, the entry was as simple as, I made it outside for 10 minutes, or I called a friend and laughed. Gradually, I began to feel more like myself. My energy came back, not all at once, but in gentle waves. I found joy in simple things, watering my plants, folding laundry, reading a good book, and hearing my grandchildren's voices on the phone. I paid attention to my body's cues, letting myself rest when I needed to and moving when I could. What surprised me most was how my mindset began to change. Instead of seeing my diagnosis as a life sentence, I started to see it as an opportunity. It was an invitation to slow down, to treat myself with kindness, to appreciate the small pleasures of each day. I became curious about what else I could do to feel better, not out of fear, but out of genuine hope. I looked for little ways to nurture myself, listening to music that lifted my spirits, spending time in the garden, and finding new recipes to try. I found myself drawn to stories of other people who had faced similar challenges and come through stronger on the other side. Their resilience inspired me and reminded me that I, too, was capable of change. The support of my doctor and my family became my anchor. Dr. Collins checked in regularly, adjusting my treatment plan and encouraging me to celebrate even the smallest victories. My children and grandchildren cheered me on from near and far, sending photos, notes, and care packages filled with love. I let their faith in me become my own. One afternoon, months after that first difficult diagnosis, I looked out the window and realized the garden was blooming again. The tomatoes were ripening on the vine, the birds were singing, and the air smelled like summer. I took a deep breath and felt gratitude for the turning point that set me on this path, for the struggles that taught me patience, for the slow, steady progress that had become my new normal. I knew I'd never be 20 again, that some days would still be hard. But I had found a new kind of strength, a quiet, resilient hope that came from choosing, again and again, to care for myself with compassion. I had tried and failed, and tried again, and in the trying, I had learned that the most important thing was not to give up. This is what renewed commitment looks like. Not perfection, but perseverance. Not grand gestures, but daily acts of courage and care. For anyone standing at the edge of their turning point, feeling scared or uncertain, I want you to know that it's okay to stumble. It's okay to feel afraid. But you are stronger than you think, and every day is a chance to begin again. My journey is still ongoing, and I expect it always will be. But now, when I see my reflection, I no longer see just a tired face. I see someone who kept going, someone who learned to love themselves enough to try, even when it was hard. And that, I think, is the true gift of growing older. The wisdom to know that every day, every moment, is a chance to renew your commitment to yourself, to your health, to your life. I never expected the greatest change in my health to begin with a simple hello at the edge of my front yard. For weeks, after my diagnosis and all those attempts to fix myself, I had kept mostly to myself. But one sunny afternoon, as I was slowly pulling weeds near the mailbox, my neighbor Elena came walking by. Elena had lived on our street longer than anyone. Past 80 now, still strong and lively, with sharp eyes and a habit of carrying herself like a retired dancer. She always had time for a chat, and always seemed to have some new bit of wisdom or encouragement tucked in her pocket for those who needed it. That day, I must have looked particularly down, because she stopped and watched me for a moment, then asked, "How are you, truly?" There was no pretending with Elena. Something in her steady gaze made it easy to be honest. I told her everything: the fatigue, the bloating, the restless nights, and finally, the diagnosis of fatty liver. I tried to keep my voice light, but there was a crack of worry that slipped out anyway. Instead of sympathy or generic advice, Elena just nodded, as if she'd heard this story many times before. "Have you ever tried dandelion leaf?" she asked. I blinked at her, surprised. I'd only ever thought of dandelions as cheerful yellow weeds, popping up on lawns and in sidewalk cracks, certainly not as medicine. Elena smiled at my confusion. "Dandelion is more than a weed, you know. My mother swore by it. Every spring, she'd gather fresh leaves for tea. She said it woke up the liver after winter." Then, seeing my curiosity, she added, "It's not magic, but it helps. Nature has her quiet ways." I couldn't help but be intrigued. So Elena led me to her backyard, where neat rows of herbs grew in a raised bed and a cluster of dandelions bobbed in the breeze. She picked a handful of young leaves and handed them to me, along with the simplest instructions. "Rinse them well, let them dry, and use them for tea. Just a cup in the morning, another in the afternoon, for a week," she said. "No sugar, no cheating. And you have to keep moving, just a little every day. It's not a quick fix. It's a nudge." I carried those leaves home feeling a little foolish, but also strangely hopeful. Something about Elena's calm confidence, and her years of experience, made me want to believe in this humble remedy. So that evening, I began my experiment. I washed the dandelion leaves, patted them dry, and spread them on a clean towel to finish drying overnight. I couldn't help but remember my mother in her kitchen, making peppermint tea for stomach aches and insisting that most answers could be found in the garden if you knew where to look. The next morning, I followed Elena's instructions closely. I boiled a quart of water, then turned off the heat and added a generous tablespoon of dried dandelion leaves. I covered the pot to keep the oils from escaping, letting it steep for 15 minutes until the kitchen filled with a faintly earthy, herbal scent. I strained the tea into a glass pitcher, poured myself a cup, and stared at it for a while before taking the first sip. Dandelion tea is no sweet southern iced tea, let's be honest. It's slightly bitter and grassy, with an aftertaste that reminds you this is not meant to be a treat but a tonic. Still, it was tolerable. I drank it warm, unsweetened, just as Elena said. Later that afternoon, I poured myself another cup, following the same routine. No sugar, no sweetener. Just me and the leaves. I decided, if I was going to give this a real try, I should commit. For the next 7 days, I paired the tea with simple, wholesome meals: steamed vegetables, lean protein, brown rice, a little fruit, nothing heavy or processed. I made myself walk every day, even if only to the corner and back. I kept a little notebook, jotting down how I felt each morning and night. The first 3 days were harder than I expected, not physically, but emotionally. There was something both humbling and empowering about choosing a simple, natural path over the fancy pills and magic potions I'd wasted money on. At first, I felt a bit more tired than usual, sometimes even a little irritable. My tongue had a strange white coating in the morning, and my breath was less than fresh. I read that this was normal, a sign that the body was getting rid of old toxins. I trusted the process. On day 4, I woke up and noticed my stomach felt lighter. Not flat like it was at 30, of course, but no longer swollen and heavy. My digestion felt easier. There were no more endless afternoons spent feeling bloated and sluggish. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept deeply, waking refreshed instead of groggy. The changes were subtle but undeniable. By the 7th day, I felt like I had gotten a piece of myself back. My mind was clearer. The background static of worry and exhaustion had faded. I wasn't bursting with energy, let's not get carried away, but I had enough to do what I wanted. Walk around the garden, sweep the porch, and even read a few chapters of a good book without drifting off mid-sentence. My eyes looked brighter, my skin less dull. I felt present, alive as if I'd emerged from a long, gray winter. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. The emotional shift was just as important as the physical one. Where I had felt powerless, now I felt in control. Where there was shame, now there was a quiet pride, not for achieving anything dramatic, but for simply showing up for myself, day after day, with patience and kindness. There was a kind of peace in the routine, the boiling of water, the careful steeping of leaves, the quiet moments sipping tea at my kitchen table while the birds chirped outside. I felt more in tune with myself than I had in years. At the end of the week, I scheduled a follow-up with Dr. Collins. I was nervous. I hadn't told him about the dandelion tea. Part of me worried he'd roll his eyes or warn me away from folk remedies. But I wanted to know if any of this change I felt inside would show up in the numbers. A few days later, I sat in his office again, waiting for the results. Dr. Collins looked over the paperwork, his expression unreadable at first. Then his eyes softened, and a small smile appeared. "Your liver enzymes are much improved," he said. "The inflammation markers have gone down, and your blood work looks better overall. What have you been doing differently?" So I told him the truth. About Elena. About the dandelion leaf. About my week of walking, simple meals, and gentle self-care. I expected skepticism, but instead, Dr. Collins listened quietly. He reminded me that, while no single plant or habit is a miracle cure, the combination of healthier choices, discipline, and hope could move mountains. "Nature has supported healing for generations," he said. "What matters is your commitment to caring for yourself." His words felt like a benediction. I left the office with a lightness I hadn't known in months, a sense that I was, in my small way, turning things around. Not with expensive drugs or complicated routines, but with attention, patience, and the willingness to let myself be helped, by a neighbor, by nature, and by my determination. Looking back, what I learned from that week was bigger than any lab result. I learned that healing doesn't have to be dramatic to be real. Sometimes it's the smallest things, a new habit, a walk outside, a cup of something bitter and green, that bring us back to ourselves. I learned that natural doesn't mean easy, but it does mean trusting in the quiet intelligence of your own body, letting go of shame, and finding joy in gentle progress. Dandelion tea didn't cure me, let's be clear, but it was a turning point. It reminded me that my body could respond, could recover if only I listened to its needs and treated it with respect. It taught me that support sometimes comes from the most unexpected places, a wise neighbor, a patch of weeds, a memory from childhood. It gave me back my sense of agency, a belief that I wasn't at the mercy of age or diagnosis and that I could shape my well-being day by day. Best of all, this experience reconnected me with my community. Neighbors asked about my health. Friends shared their remedies and stories. My daughter called more often, encouraged by my renewed spirit. Even Dr. Collins seemed more optimistic. I became the person others came to with their questions. What did you do? How did you turn things around? I found myself passing along not just the recipe for dandelion tea, but the message that real healing comes from consistent, gentle care. From believing you deserve to feel better, no matter your age. And so, I kept up my new routines. Not perfectly. There were days I forgot the tea, indulged in something sweet, or skipped my walk. But instead of seeing these as failures, I learned to see them as part of a longer story, one where progress was measured in years, not days. I learned to trust the process, to celebrate small victories, to forgive setbacks. The greatest lesson, perhaps, was that true healing isn't about going back to the way things were, but about moving forward with new wisdom. It's about tuning in to the soft signals your body sends, making gentle adjustments, and accepting that every stage of life offers new chances to grow, to care, and to begin again. Whether it's a cup of dandelion tea, a heartfelt conversation with a neighbor, or the quiet resolve to try again tomorrow, these small choices add up. They become the foundation of a well-lived, well-loved life. If you're reading this and wondering if something so simple could help, I say, give it a chance. Listen to those around you, to your body, to the whispers of wisdom that drift through your days. Sometimes the best remedies are the ones that have been here all along, growing right under our feet, waiting for us to notice. And you, yes, you, deserve every gentle, hopeful chance to feel whole again. As I sit here reflecting on this journey, I'm filled with a deep sense of gratitude and hope. The days when fatigue and discomfort ruled my life feel like a distant memory now. It wasn't magic or some quick fix that brought me here. It was patience, small changes, and the simple courage to listen to my body when it finally whispered instead of screamed. I've learned that healing is a path, not a destination, and every step forward, no matter how small, is worth celebrating. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this: you are never too old to make a change, to reclaim your health, and to find joy in the little things again. Your body holds so much strength and resilience, waiting quietly for you to honor it. Whether it's trying a natural remedy, walking a bit more each day, or simply paying attention to how you feel, every choice matters. Thank you for staying with me, and for listening to this story that is as much yours as it is mine. I hope it brings you encouragement and the belief that you, too, can find a new beginning. Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And if this video helped, please like, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe for more stories and tips to support your well-being. Remember, you deserve to live well, feel vibrant, and enjoy every day to the fullest.